Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and hello and welcome to another FSElite video. My name is Calum, and we are doing X-Plane 12 Deep Dive Episode 6. Yes, 6. We've done that many so far because there is so much to talk about in the world of X-Plane 12, and I am very excited to be joined by Julian from the Laminar Research team. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Calum. Thank you very much for inviting me to do this segment.
Of course, it's been our pleasure. I mean, it's been really interesting actually to learn so much more about the people behind X-Plane 12. Not only just the simulator itself and new features, but also how people have managed to get involved in the development of the simulator itself. So, yeah, the pleasure is all mine to have you here really today. Well, first of all, please introduce yourself to the community and tell us a little bit more about kind of just your personal self and maybe what you get up to in your spare time.
Okay, well, my name is Julian Lockwood. Generally speaking, at Laminar, my responsibility is to manage the acquisition of airports into the simulator. So we do this using the airport gateway, which I'm sure we'll discuss in detail later. But prior to my involvement in Laminar, I used to be in the business logistics sphere. I worked for IBM for a couple of years. Then I moved into the government sector, also doing business and logistics systems. At some point along the way, I got myself a private pilot license and kind of got interested in flying for a few years. Then I stopped flying, and around about the early 2010s, I think it was, I decided I wanted to sort of get back into the aviation game, but not necessarily flying. So I thought, well, let's have a go at building a home cockpit, which I did rather a bad job of. But nonetheless, that kind of got me involved with looking around for a simulator platform that would be good for that particular project. And I ended up finding X-Plane, which I thought was the best product, the most modern product at the time. And I guess that was sort of my introduction to X-Plane. And it was a terrific product, but one of the things that frustrated me at the time with X-Plane, this was X-Plane 10. I think it was actually right at the beginning of the X-Plane 10 release. One of the things that frustrated me was that the airports were really, pretty poor. All the pavement was there, the runways, the taxiways were all in place, but there was no 3D elements to the airports. They were just sort of essentially, parking lots. And I looked around at, how we could maybe, or how I could maybe solve this problem. And I came up with a design, a very crude at the time design for a portal through which people could submit airports that they had built for X-Plane, and then we could gather them all into the product. And I put together this design and contacted Austin, and I honestly never thought he would ever reply back to me. But to my amazement, I got an email back from Austin in like minutes. And it turned out that I was actually very lucky because inside Laminar at that time, there had been talk already of how to solve this problem. All the tools were in place to allow the community to build airports, but the kind of mechanism to gather them all together in a sensible way was missing. And so Austin got my email at just a very fortuitous time. And what was also very lucky was that by sheer, I don't know, 1,000,000 to 1 chance, Austin lived an hour from where I lived. I mean, I had absolutely no idea. I assumed he lived in Silicon Valley or, somewhere miles away in California or something. Anyway, it turned out he lived in South Carolina and I live in South Carolina, and we were only an hour apart. So I was able to go over and meet Austin, and we sat down in a little coffee house in Columbia, South Carolina, and I presented him with the design of the gateway, and it all kind of happened, from that point onwards, really.
Wow, what a small world to
Yes,
you said be
extraordinary.
that close to him. Wow. Okay. So, I have a couple of questions actually. The first of all is this home cockpit you tried to build. What aircraft were you trying to build in? What current state is that in?
Oh yes, well, my home cockpit was very generic. It wasn't ambitious enough to be any specific aircraft. I did have a projection system set up around it, which was quite difficult to get right. But the actual cockpit itself was just sort of a Cytec based sort of low end hardware type cockpit. Um, I had a lot of fun doing it, but also an awful lot of frustration. If I came back and did it a second time, I think I would try to do it better.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And then, so you mentioned about the scenery gateway. I mean, this is a great opportunity to start talking about it, really. So, for those who may not be familiar with what the scenery gateway is and how it works, please, if you could explain how it works and what it does, that would be fantastic.
Okay. Well, Laminar has for a long time distributed a free product called World Editor, which we generally refer to as WED. And this is a tool that allows anybody in the community to build airports for X-Plane. So you've got basically a top-down sort of view with some satellite imagery, and on top of that, you can plot down your runways, your taxiways, your ramps, 3D buildings, all of the aspects that go into an airport. But what wasn't in place for a long time was a sort of controlled mechanism to bring that all together in one place. So people in the community were posting their completed projects on forums and various things, and it was up to you, the X-Plane customer, to go looking for your airport if you had a particular airport you wanted to fly out of, and then download it and bring it into the sim. So what the gateway is really just a server. It's a portal, a website, and it interfaces with World Editor. So once you build your airport and you are happy with your completed project, you can export your airport to the gateway. You need to have you need to register credentials on the gateway to do this. But you export your airport up to the gateway, and then we receive the airport. And at some point shortly after that, I will look at the airport, check it, make sure that it passes certain minimum standards. If it does, we approve the airport, and then at some point in the future, that airport will find its way into X-Plane, into the next release of X-Plane. If the airport has some kind of issue that we can't, that won't allow us to approve it, you'll get a response back from the gateway, which will say, we're sorry, we couldn't approve this airport for the following reason. And then you can make the adjustment and submit it again. So the gateway is really sort of just a way of managing this whole process. You can see the evolution of any given airport. If you just, let's say, for example, you go to San Francisco International, you'll be able to see all the submissions that have been made over the history of that airport in X-Plane from various different artists, all the statuses of those submissions. And if you want to build on that airport, you can import it from the gateway down into World Editor, make the changes that you want, and export it back to the gateway, and then the whole kind of process begins over again. I hope that explains basically what the gateway is.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's one of the more kind of unique aspects of X-Plane is to be able to very quickly add and grow kind of all these airports that the community have created, because like you say, default sims sometimes tend to not have the most realistic or even the correct layout of many airports. And some people may not want all the fancy buildings and stuff, but they at least want the taxiways and the runways to be as accurate as possible, especially if they're flying online and stuff like that.
Right.
So I think most people who might be watching this would be aware of kind of freeware and payware products. So how do they kind of compare to like the scenery gateway stuff? Because obviously the scenery gateway is all free content that's essentially added to the sim.
Right,
Is there
that's true.
is there kind of like freeware? Can people, like these creators, add textures and assets to make them of a higher quality, or is it kind of restricted to what you can do within this world editor you've been talking about?
Right. Well, one of the limitations of airports that are built specifically for the gateway is they must be built entirely from laminar assets. So that means polygons, terrain, assets, 3D buildings, facades, trees, everything has to come from our library. And so there are certain third party libraries out there which have very, very nice assets that you can use in third party airports that are distributed in other places. But if you're going to build an airport for the gateway, because we're bringing that airport into the core product, it does have to use only the assets in our library. But that limitation will be far less in X-Plane 12, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a moment. But the assets that we have in X-Plane 12 are, in my opinion, a lot more exciting for artists in the community than what we had previously. And even though you still have to confine yourself to the library that we give you, that library is a lot nicer, a lot better, and it will allow gateway artists or airport builders that submit to the gateway to create what I would suggest are much more organic looking airports. You know, the terrain looks much nicer. We've got lots of effects that you can drop in to make the pavement edges look damaged, dirty, worn, etc. Nice patches of sand and soil and things you can drop in that just give the airport a much more organic look. And you know, even though you'll be limited to our library, I think people will like what they see in the new library a lot more than what we had in 11.
So you bring up this library. Is there, beyond some of the things you've already mentioned, what else do you think will get all these creators excited and potentially add even more great looking airports to the gateway?
Right. Well, let me start with the 2D aspects of the airports first, and then we'll cover the 3D aspects. So we have somewhere in the region of 40 new asphalt and concrete pavement polygons right now in the library. So these give artists a lot more control over the airport than they had before. Before they would have a couple of asphalt options, a couple of concrete options, and so forth. But we've got some beautiful new textures that have been built by Peter, one of our artists. For example, you've got plain concrete and asphalt, new concrete and asphalt, clean, worn, dirty, damaged, and probably a couple of others that have slipped my mind. So those look really terrific, and they're a big leap from what we had before. Then once you've kind of laid down your basic pavement, there are also pavement effects that you can add uh, afterwards. And excuse me if I just look up at my notes for a minute here, but I think we have something like 80 effects that you can drop in. So things like asphalt seams, cracked or elevated pavement edges, curbs, dirt, sand, soil perimeters, drains, manhole covers, all the kind of things that we never had in 11 that really make a big difference to how the airport looks. And then when it comes to terrain at the airport, the new default airport terrain that you have in the mesh, in the X-Plane 12 mesh, is really a big leap versus what we had before. So there's, I think, 20 new terrain textures: desert, dry grass, lush grass, sand, soil, and a few others, I think. that look way nicer at the airports just by default than we had before. And those textures are determined by various data items that we bring into X-Plane. We have land class data, OpenStreetMap, vector data, elevation data. The season that you're flying in makes a difference to the default terrain. And the perimeter, the airport boundary that has been drawn by the gateway artist also affects where the terrain begins and ends. And that is much sharper now than it was in X-Plane 11. In 11, it kind of bled away from the airport quite a bit, whereas now it follows more faithfully the boundary that the artist draws, but it's still soft blended so that it doesn't, you don't have a hard cutoff where the boundary ends and the rest of the world begins. So that's essentially what we will have from a 2D perspective. That's new. From a 3D perspective, we've got the dynamic jetways, which I'll come back to it. I'm sure people want to hear more about that. We've got new hangars that our art team are working on. Some of the older terminal facades that date probably even X-Plane 10, which I guess you could call legacy terminal facades, really look a little bit tired now. I believe they're going to get reworked. I've certainly asked for that. We've got new 3D fences, which look really lovely at airports. The old fences, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but if you looked along the fence, it disappeared because it was 2D, two-dimensional. So from certain angles, it looked good. From certain others, it didn't. We've got beautiful new 3D fences now. We've got fuel stations, fuel tanks, and 30 new commercial control tower models, which Cristiano has built, and they're absolutely gorgeous. And also for military control towers. I don't think we ever had military control towers before. They're also lovely. The commercial towers are scalable in height. So the WED artist can control how high he can select the model he wants and then control how high the tower is. And then he can choose whether to have a base attached to the tower or not. So obviously, if you have a base attached to the tower, that sits on the ground always. And then the elevation that you select controls the height of the tower portion that sticks up above the base. So, those are just some of the things that I can think of. There's more stuff. I think once our gateway artists get hold of this, they're really going to go ballistic, because all of the things that have frustrated us, or many of the things that have frustrated us as enthusiast airport builders in X-Plane up to this point, have now been finally unleashed. And I certainly hope we're going to have a flood of activity on the gateway from people who have finally got hold of all these awesome new tools and assets.
So just out of interest, then, if I've already created an airport within the Scenery Gateway, am I going to have to re-download, say, my creation and kind of apply some of these new techniques, or is anything kind of carried over but just improved by default just through the development of your sim?
Right. Well, actually, it's a little bit of both. When the airports that we currently have sitting on the gateway are exported to X-Plane 12 prior to the first release of 12, or it may happen sooner than that, but certainly at some point there will be a gathering of all the airports into X-Plane 12, and there's an automatic bot conversion for a lot of the stuff. So, for example, the old pavement textures will automatically be substituted with the new pavement textures. The same, of course, the terrain mesh will all be new as well. The jetways there will be some heuristics applied to the jetways to try to make them, once they become dynamic, to try to make them function in 12 without manual, so at least the goal is, without manual intervention. However, in my opinion, there will still be a need for our gateway artists to revisit their airports and test some of this stuff. The jetways are a classic example. The way that the jetways work is that at a particular gate, you can have a cluster of, let's say, multiple jetways, of which the gateway artist, the airport builder, will need to make sure that the right jetway is the dynamic one, because there's only one dynamic jetway and the others all remain stationary. So people will probably have to go back, look at their jetways, make some adjustments, make sure the tunnels are long enough to reach the airplane, make sure that the range of motion that the jetway has will line up with the airplane door. And there are some tools in WED to assist with all of this stuff. So I think there will be a need for people to go back and kind of test their airports from that perspective. Plus, of course, we've got all these gorgeous new assets that you can drop in and snap to your pavement, drop in on top of the terrain, patches of sand, soil, pavement edges, asphalt seams, lots of other things. So even though the airports will look a lot better just straight off the bat in 12 because of the bot conversion, I think people will want to go back to their airports, re-import them into WED, add in a lot of these new effects which are sort of manually put in, available in the library for you to put in. And then I think then send them back up to the gateway. And I think that is probably how we're going to sort of get the best outcome here. It's a little bit of auto and a little bit of manual.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. I mean, it's great that by default some of these airports will just look better because they are in a improved sim with improved textures and modeling and stuff. So that's really cool to hear. I mean, you've mentioned jetways a few times now, and there's clearly now a difference between some static ones and some dynamic ones.
Yes.
You said you're going to come back and talk about it. So let's
Right.
talk about jetways. I mean, everyone's going to want to know a little bit more about how they work in the new sim.
Right. Okay. The jetway facades that were introduced during 11 were a replacement to the objects, the static objects that we had previous to that. But even though the facades were new, they were still static. What we now have in 12 is an animation of those jetways, provided the artist that built the airport used the facades and didn't use the objects. Now, at any given gate, only one jetway is active and the others are static, and you control which one you wish to be the active one. Of course, it's not a problem if there's only one jetway at the gate anyway. The way that the docking and the undocking of the jetway to the aircraft is controlled is through a new pop-up dialog that we have in the user interface, which is a ground handling or ground operations selection from the menu. And in that dialog, you have a couple of features. You can dock and undock the jetway. You can call for trucks to come and service the airplane. You can dismiss the trucks. You can call for a pushback. So this is all now controlled from a new user interface. It does require a little bit of testing. If you're building an airport, I think it's going to require a little bit of trial and error to make sure that once your airplane is parked at the gate and you click, you pop up the dialog and you say, yes, I want to dock the gateway to the aircraft, to make sure that it actually goes where you want it to go, connects to the airplane, doesn't clip through another static gateway tunnel, which can happen. So, it does require a little bit of finessing.
Mm.
So, but it's fun. So I think people will enjoy playing with it.
Yeah, it sounds complicated, but I imagine at the same time there's an element of reward from it, and ultimately being able to share it with all those people using X-Plane 12 is quite an awesome thought afterwards as well.
Absolutely. I think it's an awesome new feature. I think people will like it a lot.
Yeah, that sounds great. So you've mentioned about the trucks as well. Is there anything that these creators can use to add the trucks? Because I've seen some footage where you've got like electric cars driving past and food carts and all sorts of other, I guess, airport life. So is that something else that these airport creators can add to the creations?
Yes, absolutely. The ground trucks follow routes that are placed by our airport developers. So the way this works is you lay out the segments, you connect together these segments to form routes, and then at various locations around your ground route network, you place either truck starting positions or truck ending positions. So the trucks will take a little ride from where they start up to the destination point, and they make a little pit stop there, and then find their way back again. So the truck, once you place these routes in your airport and you place these trucks into your airport, then they will start doing their own thing. Mostly they do sensible things, but not always. There are some issues that are still being worked on. For example, the trucks are not currently aware of hard objects like walls, cargo pallets, and things like this. So they do tend to clip through those. But certainly the trucks behave better than they did in 11. They tend to be more respectful of each other than they were before. They drive a little slower. They don't career around corners like they're being driven by Mario Andretti. So they're a little bit better in 12. There's still more work to be done on that side. Um, but also connected to this subject, I should probably also talk about the AI airplane routes that can also place into airports. So we basically have two types of routes that artists or airport developers can place. One are the truck routes, so you can control where the trucks go. The other are the ATC routes, and these control where the AI aircraft go. So generally, you lay those out so that they pass close to the gates. They follow the taxiways onto the runways, and then you place the routes on the runways. Um, and the AI aircraft in 12 still follow those same routes that gateway artists have placed into airports to date, but they now also are integrated with Jim Keir's new ATC system. So the AI aircraft take instructions from the new ATC system and therefore behave sensibly relative to those instructions that are being given. So, but from an airport builder's perspective, nothing's changed. You place your airplane routes, and you place your ground truck routes.
Right. So it sounds to me like these airports are more alive than they've ever been in previous versions of X-Plane.
Yeah, most definitely. There's a lot more dynamic content here now, and also, of course, we have the weather effects at airports now. So when you start a flight, one of the things that you can select is the state of the runway in terms of seasonal effects or weather effects. So you've got an option, for example, to pick a dry runway or a wet runway or a standing water. situation or snow or ice. And having made that selection, that's the starting point for your airport. So the runways, the taxiways, the ramps, the terrain at the airport will initially have whatever that selection was. Let's say, for example, you selected ice, then there'll be ice on all of those locations. But then secondary to that is the state of the weather at the time you're making your flight. So let's say, for example, you select an icy runway, then you'll see ice around the airport. But if you also select a 80-degree sunny day, that ice is going to start melting and gradually disappear. And obviously the same in reverse. If you select a dry runway, but the weather at the airport is heavy rain, what you'll see is the rain start to accumulate on the pavement, and then the rain splashes starting to happen in as they hit the standing water. So you've got a dynamic environment from a weather perspective, as well as all of the little trucks and airplanes that are flying around the airport as well.
So when you mention about ice and water building up on the taxi and runways, does that have an effect on the aircraft itself and how it handles and moves on that ground?
That is a good question. I would have to defer that question to Austin, because that's a flight model question. I think I'm not qualified to answer that.
Fair enough. We'll put that to him in a future episode, I'm sure.
Very good.
But knowing Austin, you know what he's like. He's a stickler for the detail. So that sounds like something either he's implemented or will kind of think about and stuff in the future, which is awesome. Okay, that's really cool. And I think based on kind of the previews which you've sent us and what we've seen before, the difference between an X-Plane 11 airport and an X-Plane 12 airport is really night and day in terms of the quality. And in previous episodes, we've spoken to Ben about the lighting engine and the rendering. We've also spoken to Daniela, who's talked about the sound environments, and all of these things seem to be coming together to create this great looking ecosystem, and also benefiting kind of the airports as well, where we spend a lot of time in the cockpit. We also spend a lot of time in these airport environments as well. So we've spoken a lot about the airport gateway and what content creators can do as well. Are there, for lack of a better word, like Laminar created airports in X-Plane 12 that are different or improved over version 11?
There are some airports that I'm working on right now, and my colleague Jan Vogel is working on. What we're doing is custom or manually injecting the new assets into at the moment, I think somewhere around 10 airports, so that we have those ready to go when X-Plane launches. But I certainly want to add more than that. So Jan and I will be working on adding more. I would like at some point to be able to release alpha or beta copies of the sim to the Gateway community, to also do this manual injection of the assets that won't be part of the auto bot conversion. And it does make a tremendous difference to how good the airport looks. I don't know if that's going to be possible, but if it is possible, we would probably pick a handful of artists that have done really super work previously and try and get them involved in the project as well, so that we could launch with as many airports as possible that have been handcrafted to make them just that little bit better than what the bot can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said as well, you're hoping that you'll get a kind of a landslide of creators come in once it, even after it releases, to help strengthen all of those gateway airports as well post-release, which is really cool.
Yes, I certainly anticipate that there will be a big initial surge on the gateway once everybody gets hold of 12. Yeah.
Excellent. So before we wrap things up, is there anything else on airports you really want to mention or talk about or explain to the audience today?
You know what? I think that pretty much covers it. The only thing I would add is I'd like to shout out a few names of people that have done terrific work. Peter has done terrific work on the ground, textures, and some of the 3D assets. Cristiano has done terrific work making the new control tower assets. Daniela and Guillermo have done terrific work developing the gateway way beyond the scope of what I dreamed it could ever be. And if it hadn't been for all of those things, these are the people that have all the talent that has made all this happen. My role here has been really essentially just the final piece in the jigsaw to create the gateway and harness all of the brilliance of the team that we have at X-Plane. So thank you to them.
I think what I've really loved about doing these interviews is obviously firstly talking to the people behind them, but also learning that even though we've spoken to a handful of people from the Laminar team, there's actually still so many more people behind the scenes who are working really hard to kind of put all of these little pieces together, like you said, like one giant jigsaw piece, one giant jigsaw puzzle, which is ultimately X-Plane 12. So yeah, it's been really cool to learn a little bit more about airports and everything else that we've discussed over the last 6 episodes so far, and we've still got even another episode to come after this as well. So yeah, it's been really good talking to you, Julian. Thank you so much for your time, and I cannot wait to see more of the X-Plane 12 airports, and I'm especially excited to see what these creators do with all their new and exciting tools that they got access to.
I am extremely excited to see this too. I'd like to give one more shout out to Michael Minhar as well. He has done tremendous work with World Editor. He's created a tool that really has given the community something that they can use to create these wonderful airports. But yes, I'm super excited to see how airports go. I think people will be happy with airports in X-Plane 12. I certainly have a lot of fun making them, and I think if anybody is on the fence right now thinking about building airports for X-Plane 12, get into it.
Excellent. I mean, I love seeing people create stuff, and that eventually could turn that hobby into something more in the future as well for those people. So yeah, if you're interested in content creation, then this sounds like a wonderful tool to get yourselves started with. Julian, thank you again so much for your time, and we very much look forward to seeing what airports come in X-Plane 12. Thank you again, and we will speak to you again soon.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Calum.
Of course.